Hello everyone, welcome back on the channel, and I kindly ask you to subscribe because I keep getting your comments, notes, messages and feedbacks. We've never seen analysis like this, but I see want of more of subscribers and of course more of donations if you like it. Your favorite type of the lecture, definitely these, I believe I made so far 2 videos about the Caro-Kann and about the Czech-Benoni. This is going to be the 3rd one, step by step, about the French defense. Since I really have a rich coaching experience, and since I coached more than 1,000 students so far, I gotta share with you one great thing before I begin with analysis and those stuff. First of all, I need to tell you that I cannot cover absolutely all the variations that exist in the French, so I mainly used my opening choices since I've been playing French defense for almost 25 years with black pieces. Second thing, I want to tell you that those variations that I picked, I believe they're very modern and good. I also checked with top engines, so they're pretty reliable for even good players. I keep getting messages how some even strong 2400 guys used my analysis, but the top thing was when Grandmaster 2600 10-time Serbian champion Ivan Išović told me that he was using my analysis in Sicilian c3 g6 to prepare with the black pieces. And finally, I want to tell you one more thing. Sometimes I used alternatives and I relied more on plans and ideas rather than concrete variations. So even weaker guys, even beginners, medium level guys for sure, you guys can get the ideas and get the grasp of these opening even in like couple of months, couple of years. If you just remember the ideas, it's gonna be easy for you. And that would be all. If I want to come up with something else, I'll let you know. I tried to cover absolutely everything, and this is going to be a pretty long video. So don't ask me why did it take so long. Better fasten your seat belts and get ready to learn the French defense with the black pieces. One last thing. Why did I mention that rich coaching experience? Because I've noticed whenever I did the first lesson with new students and I asked them, what do you want me to teach you to play against? They all, absolutely all, like 99.9%, teach me how to play against French. Why? I thought for a pretty long time, why is it like that? Because, and then I realized, in a French defense, problem of the pawn chain is pretty big, and it's not an open type of the game that usually white actually tends to play. So here we're actually have to learn how to break the pawn chain by white, and this is why this is a great opening for beginners and medium level players, because usually people hate to play against the French and they don't know how to play against the French. Let's get started. First, I need to tell you that I gotta cover 8 lines before I reach final 4 main ones. Let's begin with one of the least common moves, e5. Reminds me of advanced variation against the French defense. Believe it or not, one GM used it against me, Grandmaster ex-Serbian champion Miroslav Markovic. He played in tournament game e5 against me. We drew that game. I played d5, which is initially the main point of the French. And after e takes d6, I took by bishop. He played d4, knight f6, knight f3, castles, bishop d3. And if you ever play c5, he's going to be able to capture on c5 and to play 3 against 2, which is going to give white small but a long-lasting pawn majority and advantage on the queen side. So that's why you play knight bd7. That's what you have to do. You're fighting for both. You're fighting for c5 and fighting for e5. In this case, you rather want to go with c5. You play c5. That's not what I did. I instantly played c5, which was suspicious, and he got a tiny bit better position for most of the game. And after c3, you play b6. By the way, here they can't take by pawn, because then you have knight capture c5, and that's the point and the difference why they actually have to play knight bd7. So when they play c3, b6, if they ever play bishop g5, like a logical developing move, before you play knight bd2, you play h6, bishop b7. And they have problems. This knight really belongs to c3, but the pawn actually bothers this knight to jump there. So after knight bd2, queen c7, rook here, and you just go, for example, bishop f1, bishop f4. You take control of the queen side. They can hardly develop their pieces. They have problems in this type of the game, and black looks absolutely fine in this position. According to the engines, this is a little bit better position. I disagree with that one. From humans' point of view, it's roughly equal, and you should be happy to get a game like this. Then you put rook f to e8, probably rook a to c8, or if you take an isolated pawn on d4, then rook a to d8. But generally speaking, you can also fight for e5 at some point, equalizing the game almost on the spot. Second move that I'd like to cover here, that happened in another Grandmaster game against me, g3. It's not so common, but I had it in my tournament game like 15 years ago again against Grandmaster Dražić. So I played d5, bishop g2, I captured, played knight f6, and played e5. I drew that game. Black's position looks absolutely satisfactory. You just open up your weakest piece in the French. It's the light square bishop. So when they play d3, you just want to complete your development with the bishop c5 and want to go with short castle afterwards. That's what you do, and that's how your position should look like. This is absolutely not a typical position for the French. You solve the position of the light square bishop, which is already a great thing, and your position should look really good. Then we gotta go on the third opening. It's f4. F4 I face quite often in my bullet and blitz games. Lots of my students face this f4 move so many times in their tournament games. Usually, if it's paired with knight f3, c3, and d4, then it's bad. But if they play it like the way they're supposed to play, so you play d5, typical French move, e5, and this way they're just closing your weakest piece, and it's the light square bishop. I'm going to repeat it so many times during this lecture, because that's the only drawback of the French defense. You actually have problems with light square bishop and its activity. Here you go with c5, typical French move, knight f3, knight c6, and don't worry, they should never play d4, because you always should take and get like good control of the dark squares. Also, in French, there is a general rule: whenever they give you possibility to take on d4 and they don't have time to take by pawn on d4, which means that they can't take and they can hold the center, then you just take by pawn and you have a nice game. So after like c3, point of c3 is not to play d4. You just play knight g on e7. The point of knight g on e7 to face d4 in the most classic fashion with c takes d4, for example, c takes d4 and knight f5. And then when you go with the queen b6, all of a sudden they have problems with the dark square bishop, because it's hitting its own pawn, which is bad for them. And also the bishop on c1 is locked. You go with a queen b6, and you most likely are going to win either the pawn on d4, which is a pawn base, and usually weaker guys, they just lose this pawn without any problems. That's why I actually find the French opening pretty good for beginners, or against the beginners. And they also have problems with the b2 pawn once you play queen b6 and go after the b2 pawn. That's why they're not supposed to play d4. But good players will go with the knight a3. I found a couple of games played by Nakamura, Caruana, and other guys, and I realized that after knight a3, White was still waiting, black was still waiting for white's d4, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen, and that's the point here. They just want to go with knight c2, bishop d3, and to go this fashion. This system is quite... it's been quite popular in the last couple of years since Gambit started, and in all those blitz and faster time controls, once in a while some good players used to play this second move f4 against the French. So what's the point? If they go with the bishop d3, you should never be afraid of giving up the knight for the bishop and ending up with the double pawns, and because these double pawns really look weak at the moment, all together with our weakest piece, and that's the light square bishop. So when they go knight c2, now they would really like to play d4 because you don't have any more such a strong pressure against the d4 pawn. But what do? Now you play a key move d4, and you actually open up diagonal and the light squares for your light square bishop. That's a crucial moment and crucial thing that you got to remember in these positions. So if they go with d4, fantastic. Thank you so much, buddy. I go with I can even take here, or I can give you check. And for example, I give you check, you go here. I go here, for example, or I can even go queen b6, and all of a sudden you lose the pawn on d4. That's one thing. Or let's say I take like that's why you go bishop d3, and now you take it. Now you really want to play d4. Unfortunately for you, you can't play d4 yet, because I can always take, and when you take, I can even take on a3, or I can even go with the bishop b4 check. Another thing is that I wish I can place my bishop on e6 and then go with h6 and g5, which would be a good idea of breaking his position. For example, he goes knight c2, and here you don't want to play castle, but you want to play h6. For example, they go like this, and boom, you go with g5. You definitely have to find a way to break on the king's side and to somehow reopen and reactivate your bishops, mainly your light square bishop on e6. And if they go with the knight c2 here, always make sure to play d4 just in time. So when you play d4, you're just opening the light square bishop, and it's no longer your weakest piece in this opening. After like c takes d4, c takes d4, d3, castles, bishop e6, you no longer have problems with your bishops. I like them very much. Yes, you do have these double pawns, but it's not the end of the world. Your pawn on d4 has just opened up your light square bishop on e6. They have problems with the dark square bishop that is a bit problematic, because it's kind of limited because of these pawns on f4 and e5. And then I would just go with rook c8, rook fd8, queen b6, a5, and with full control of the game on the queen side by black. There was one good game between Stripunsky and Nakamura, played in St. Louis 2010, where Stripunsky went for knight c2. He's waiting for Nakamura to see what is he going to do. Stripunsky definitely wants to play d4 now, because he afterwards wants to solidify himself, or he maybe just wants to do something else with his knights. But the problem is, Nakamura just plays d4 just in time. We always want to go with this d4, and when he went with a bishop d3, Nakamura made a move that I really enjoy and like so much. It's queen b6. It's a typical French move that doesn't only defend the pawn on d4, but also opens up the d-file, possibility for long castle in some variations, and also for rook to d8 or simple bishop d7 and rook c8 plans by black. Now, when queen e2 happened, Nakamura brought a knight back here. He doesn't want to give this guy possibility anymore to take on f5, even though it wouldn't be the end of the world, and it would be a pretty nice position for black anyways. But he's now having another idea. He wants to reposition his knight to d5, go after the pawn on f4, and wants to centralize his pieces. Stripunsky plays bishop e4, knight e5. Clever way of solving the weakness of the light square bishop. If bishop takes on d5, he would take by pawn and open famous weak light square bishop on c8. Although the guy plays g3, defending the pawn on f4, bishop d7, and plays c4. Nakamura plays knight b4, d3, exchanges these knights, and plays a very strong move. I very much like this move. I believe it's one of the crucial moves in this system, because bishop is centralized, looks good, but now you gotta take on f6, which opens up g-file, which opens up h5, h4. It still threatens f5. So when Strzepuński played knight h4, f5, bishop was brought back to g2. Nakamura played castles, bishop d6, and played rook dg8. Rook d on e8 would also be fine with the idea e5, but he had something else up his sleeve here. He wants to play there h5, h4, or he wants to go with h6, preventing knight g5, and then he just wants to go with some other type of things and ideas. He absolutely equalized, even got a small advantage, and of course, since he's better player, he managed to win this game afterwards. We've checked like 3 possibilities, and it's time for the fourth one. Fourth one is b3. I don't know the names of these white's openings and continuations. I just know that b3 is very common in blitz and bullet games against me. On b3, of course, always play d5. And they're not supposed to take, and they're also not supposed to play e5, because in that case the dark square bishop and b2 would be weak. Those who play this variation with b3, they just go with bishop b2, you take, knight c3, knight f6, and they go with queen e2. An idea of queen e2 is, I'd say, multiple ideas for white here. They want to get the pawn at the right moment. They want to prepare for a long castle, and they want to go with g4 and g5, chasing this knight away, and in a way opening up the bishop on b2. So if black plays, I would say, not cautiously enough this opening, he can get in very easy troubles. Just to show you, for example, line, my move is going to be bishop b4. And the idea for this is I want to retain the pawn on e4 being there and to be a pawn up as long as I can, because you can't take on e4 since I'm going to deliver checkmate on d2. And that's the point of bishop b4. But imagine you forget the line and you play bishop e7. They go castles, you go castle, you say like I'm completing my development. All of a sudden they go g4. You say no big deal, I just go with, I don't know, knight c6 or knight b7 or b6, do whatever you like. Let's say you go b6 to do something with that bishop g5. You go knight e5, they go knight e4. You go bishop e7, they can just, for example, play knight f3. You complete your development like this, and now they have two options. They can play h4, and they can play also rook to g1. Why do I like this position so much for white? Because it looks very attacking. King looks weak. I lost many blitz and bullet games like this, and they all of a sudden threaten some h5, g6. They threaten rook g1, knight f6. They would like to take advantage of this bishop being on diagonal. That's the point of this system, and that's why we gotta stick our bishop on b4 and play our opening this way. So you just go with the bishop b4, and for the time being, you just avoid knight takes e4 by them. That's the point, and that's why you have to go with this variation. It's a very nice move, and it's actually a part of a deeper idea. They gotta go with castle, and now you go queen e7. You still don't want a castle. You still don't want to give them possibility to attack you on the king side, and you just go with the queen e7. And now we have to see what's happening. If they go with, for example, g4, which is one of the main ideas, boom, you play bishop a3. You kill their attacking plans. You kill that bishop on b2. They don't have anymore that, I would say, attacking and potential simply to build up initiative. So after g5, you bring the knight on d5, h4, since g5 pawn was hanging, you play a5, and all of a sudden, you even want to attack the white's king with a4, maybe even sack rook takes a4 and launch the queen side attack in a typical dragon fashion. So This is nice one. If queen e4, just cement your knight on d5, get like full control of the center, and afterwards you just want to go with a short castle, a4. Maybe you want to reposition your knight to d7 and c5. All things considered, white should be in problems here. If they play king b1 to face any bishop a3 with the bishop a1 and say, yes, you want to attack, but you won't be able to do that since my king is safe now, and I'm not forced even to exchange the dark square bishops, then you go with a5. And take a look at this one. They go knight e4. You just first solidify connection between your knights, and then after knight f3 you just carry on with the attack. I won so many games like this because I really enjoy my attack along the a file. Once I play a takes b3, they will hardly have time to defend this position, and I really have to say that I enjoy my position with the black pieces. When after bishop a1 a5 they just go with g4, with the difference in comparison to previous position, the dark square bishops were exchanged. Here, that's not a case. G5, knight e5, queen e4, a takes, you just go with the knight c6, and you have a very lovely counter attacking game. I really enjoy this type of game for black, and I don't see anything that problematic for us. We've completed our development. It's not the only way to go like this. You once again can go with c6 and fortify your knight on d5, and afterwards go with some sort of attack along the a file. Just like I said, I'm gonna give you ideas, and you just have to apply them afterwards in your games. Next move should be second move, c4. c4, I face it once in a while. It's not bad at all. It has so many transpositions into some Queen's Gambit accepted variations. Of course, you go with d5, and when they take. If they go with d4, we're going to cover these type of games in the exchanged variation of the French. If they go with c takes d5, you never take by queen, because taking by queen, remember, should be bad, because they just play knight c3, kick your queen away with tempo, and then whether you play queen a5 or queen d8, they will just go with d4, and they have a tiny bit better development. So why would you give them that tempo? You just go with knight f6. As you see, your opponent is about to end up with an IQP on d4. So bishop b5, knight b7, knight c3, bishop e7, castles, and you go knight b6. Just like you see, we have a typical IQP type of the game. IQP it stands for isolated queen pawn. It's usually weak, but from another point of view, it gives great attacking chances to those who have it and who know how to attack. So after knight bd5, there are two general rules that you have to remember playing against the IQP. First rule, you have to exchange pieces, and second rule, you gotta set the blockade here. Here, I just placed my knight on d5. It's a good blocking piece, but at the same time, I would be happy to, if my opponent ever, for example, plays any knight d5, or if my opponent gives me a chance to, for example, exchange like pair of the bishops. So remember, whenever you play against the isolated pawn or IQP type of the game, you're happy to block it and you're happy to exchange pieces. After rook e1, c6, c6 is a logical tempo move because you're just getting better control of the center on d5, getting like a strong grip on d5, and after bishop c4, bishop e6. And you now threaten knight c3 to take the bishop on c4. They have to bring it back, and now you play h6 because you want to pave up the way for the bishop on e6. When they play knight e5, rook e8, they go queen f3. All you have to remember, yes, h6 is good because it prevents bishop g5, but at the same time it's weakening king's position, since the h6 pawn could become a target. That's why you gotta bring your bishop back to f8, defending your king, defending pawn on h6, and if any queen g3 happens at any point, you always have time to play king to h8. That's all you gotta know about these positions. Next move. Now we have to begin with a little bit more common positions and moves by white. Those are queen e2 variation, knight f3, and famous King's Indian attack d3. So in the next like 15 minutes, I'll try to explain you secrets of these three moves. Let's begin with queen e2. It was especially popular like 20 years ago when Morozevich included this move into his own practice. Here I won't insist on so many lines. I'm just gonna tell you that I'll teach you to play c5, because now you play kind of Sicilian that looks good for black with the queen on e2 that looks odd. It blocks the light square bishop and kind of forces white to go with the g3 and bishop g2. Queen on e2 turns out in practice that had, and the whole position had the biggest problem in a game like this. I just want to show you what's the point of queen e2. Queen e2 is aimed against, probably it's the only move that is aimed against typical idea d5 by black in the French that almost always happens. And we're not supposed to play d5. After e takes d5, queen d5, we have problems. We have problems because they kick the queen away with tempo. You gotta go back with the queen on d8, and they just go either with g3 or knight f3. For example, I tried to play these positions and try to give my students following type of ideas, like play c5, and when they go g3, play knight c6, and when they play bishop g2, play knight g on e7, followed by knight f5 to control the d4. My student Grandmaster Zaich used it in his game, and yes, he drew that game, but he didn't have a nice experience in this line. He said, Maya, yes, we do have control of the d4, but somehow once they, for example, manage some d3, b3, knight e5, we actually have problems with the diagonal in this bishop. And okay, it's tiny bit better position for white, but it's one of those positions where you suffer most of the game. Another thing is after they go with the g3 is to instantly solve problem of your weakest piece, bishop g2, bishop c6, although problem is they don't want to solve the problem, they don't want to let it happen, and they just go with knight f3. You just go knight f6, they go castles, you go knight bd7, and here all you have to remember that white has to avoid exchange of the light square bishops. So they will all play rook to d1, castles, and I don't know, play b3, move the knight, play c4, fight against the bishop on c6, while you all the time have problems. This one is strong, and you all the time has to look at some knight e5. But how? Move the bishop to f1 or h3. Usually it's a little bit more active on h3 since it pressures the e6 pawn, and then try to jump on e5, harassing the light square bishop and trying to open the x-rays and the d file for the rook against the queen. All things considered, I'm not happy with these positions, and that's why in this video I'm never going to suggest you after queen e2 to play something like this. I'm gonna suggest you to play c5. So of all the variations in the whole step-by-step video about the French defense, this is the only variation where I'm proposing you not to play d5 second move. So when they go with knight f3, knight c6, g3, you have a very lovely g6. So it just transposes into some other type of ready positions, then some other type of closed Sicilian, some other type of some weird Sicilians. All things considered, this position turns out to be very difficult for white in the practice. When bishop g2, bishop g7, castles, knight g on e7. Why? Because you want to keep the bishop on g7 open, because you want to control the d4, so they will hardly play c3 and d4, and at some point you want to play 5. When does it happen? When they play c3. Like, I want to go with rook d1 and d4. You want to do that? Then I'll play e5, and you're never going to be able to do that. That's how you have to think. Also, it's way better to have your knight on e7 than on f6, because knight on e7 keeps your bishop on g7 open. It keeps controlling d4. Knight on e7 keeps controlling d5. But in some variations, in some positions, it can even go with some f5 ideas. Although that's not your plan, since they realize that they can hardly manage to play d4 at any point. They go d3, castles, queen d1. I found this absolutely the most popular in practice. Okay, it transposes into some positions like this. All these guys played queen d1, but if they play something like e3, you have two type of things: to go instantly with d5, which would be a nice control of the center, or you have d6. So when your opponent goes with something like b4, you just say, okay, I don't care, I play h6, and when you play like knight bd2 or whatever, I go bishop e6. That's why I played h6, so I secured position for my bishop. I never want to allow them to play knight g5, so when they complete development of their light minor pieces, you just go with the queen d7. The whole point of this variation is that I just want to go with some d5, f5, and game in the center. I can't play d5 for the time being because c5 is hanging, but I just want to make sure to defend c5 or to first take on before I play bishop h3, before I play d5, before I break in the center with f5. That's what you have to remember about this one, and that's all what matters in these positions. Okay, I gave you the plans there. I also, for example, if they bring the queen back going into some sort of normal positions, then you just go with d5 and you play a reverse type of the fianchetto King's Indian. It's always important to play h6. Same thing to the fianchetto King's Indian players playing against the King's Indian. They play h3, bishop e3. Here you play h6, bishop e6, and you have full control of the center and better control of the game after queen d7 and rook a to d8. Just like I said, I'm giving you plans and ideas how to develop your pieces. We've seen this move. It's time to see two knights against French and wing Gambit. So when they play knight f3, you just go with d5. You never know whether your opponent wants to play the two knights defense against the French opening or wing Gambit. My video, so popular on this channel with the white pieces, is how to play against the French wing Gambit. And I have to tell you, it's always very challenging to find something good for black against the wing Gambit. I'm also thinking, I gotta reveal that secret to you, to simply make Chessable course about the wing Gambit against the French. So we'll see, but it could be a very, very lovely one with lots of nice positions and sacrifices by white. Anyways, what's the wing Gambit? So when you play typical c5 in the French, they just go with b4. An extremely interesting opening and Gambit against the French opening, and to be honest, black had lots of difficulties against this variation in the past. You have to take on b4. I mean, you have to take. You don't have to take. You can play. You have two sidelines. You have line with b6, keeping the flexibility that I played a couple of times, and then you really threaten to take on b4. So when they play c3, you now go with the queen d7 in order to go bishop a6. This is a very common French approach, and you'll see this queen d7 idea many times. I kindly ask you, all of you, not to make the double question mark move. You can immediately quit this game, say, this is not for me. I should probably do some kind of fencing, bowling, or anything, but I shouldn't play chess because they take on a6 and they give you check. You lose the piece, go home. Now you're going to swear me. You're going to say Maya didn't explain this in the video, and that's why I needed to show you this once, and I'll show it to you one more time to avoid this kind of trick by white. So any b6 keeps the flexibility of the pawn structure. Any b6 gives you bishop a6 idea, but only when you play, and make sure to play before that queen d7. So now you understand the point of queen d7. You actually avoid queen a4 once you play bishop a6 and exchange the light square bishops. When they go with a3, solidifying the pawn structure, you go with bishop a6, they take, you take, and your knight after d4, this knight goes on e7, they go castles, your knight goes on c6, and position is okay. White definitely stands a little bit better because of more space, but you absolutely shouldn't have such a deep problems because you also managed to exchange and get rid of your biggest weakness, light square bishop. That's one plan. Another plan after b4, not to accept the gambit, is playing c4. I also tried this one out because you now want to get the pawn by bishop. They defend it by playing c3, and you challenge this pawn structure. They gotta play b5. Otherwise, if they play a3, you just take. They cannot take like this, you take the rook. And if they take by c pawn, of course, you just take pawn for nothing. So they are forced to play b5. If they take on a5, then whether you take by a rook or whatever, for the rest of the game, they will have isolated weak pawn on a2. So after a5, b5, you go knight d7, and you want to place your knight on c5 to forever get control of the d3 square. Problem here is that they just play d3, you take, they take, you just have to go with something. And it's a little bit weird position because we definitely have problems with the light square bishop. They gotta keep the peak of the pawn chain. I'm talking about a e5 pawn. It's a little bit better position for white because of more space, although his pawns are a little bit exposed and somehow chaotically placed in this type of game. That's one more plan. And finally, you have a possibility to avoid the gambit by playing this. So when they take, you just go bishop c5, and to play this type of position where you just try to play knight e7, knight c6, or bishop d7, bishop c6. I just showed you like a couple of plans, but believe it or not, my vote goes to c takes b4. Probably if you're a very solid chess player who usually wants to play calm positions without much troubles with the light square bishop, you should be going with b6, and plan should be queen d7 followed by bishop a6. It's always a universally good idea for black players trying to get rid of the weakest piece in your strategy. It's the light square bishop, and trying to get more or less solid type of the game. Although as soon as you play things like this, you're kind of very close to equal positions, but you also don't have such rich choices of getting any kind of counterplay afterwards. That's one thing. So that's why I usually in 21st century always teach my strong students to go c takes b4. An idea of c takes b4 is when they play a3, I'm gonna show you like 3 or maybe even 4 different plans. First of all, believe it or not, it's always some sort of taboo, and it's always like, let's avoid taking everything. I cannot even imagine what he's got up his sleeves. Don't worry about that. You can take on a3. So when they play d4, you go with the bishop d7. An idea of this move is to solve the problem of the light square bishop, and when they play c3, to play knight c6. Now you're probably wondering, how did I solve the problem of the light square bishop? Very, very strong move happens after they play bishop d3. All these guys like to play knight f3, bishop d3, keeping the pawn chain like this, playing castles, or not even castle, but they just go with h4 and knight g5. And they want to launch the kingside attack. Problem after bishop d3 is that now we're just trying to take advantage of having the bishop on d7. And what's happening? Boom! b5. For example, you will rarely gonna be able to find this move over the board. You just have to, of course, you can find it, but I'm saying if you don't know the theory, you wouldn't be able, or you would just spend so much time coming up with something that after this video you're gonna know without any problems. So what's the point? If they ever take this pawn, good old French idea that I showed a couple of times to my one of my favorite students, Vendôme, Chess Vendôme. So you just take on e5, and Omar, he knows it. You always go with the strict knight e5. If they take by knight, you take the bishop. If they take by bishop, you take by knight. And this is a common French trick where you win pawn. Another thing is what happens when they take, you take, and they just take knight e5, bishop e5. Looks like after knight a3, they're just chasing the bishop away with tempo. Don't worry about that. You have shocking bishop a3. We're all taught, don't play this move because it doesn't look good. You give them so strong diagonal with this bishop. Well, we also have strong bishop, and they also can't make castle. But we can make castle. That's the difference. So our knight on e7 kind of blocks this bishop and its activity. While at the same time, we want to play short castle and put our king into safety. Well, they still have problems to make short castle because of the bishop on b5. And finally, if you play b5 and they just play, for example, bishop a3, you just go with b4. And as soon as you manage to break the pawn chain, I'm talking about the pawn chain being so solid like this. Look at this pawn chain. I'm talking about the pawns on c3 and d4 and d5. They look so good. And this whole concept with bishop d7, b5, knight a3, b4 is perfect now for us, because once we break the pawn chain, we now avoid knight b5 with the idea knight d6. We want to complete knight e7 and short castle, but watch out not to blunder some knight h7 at some point, and black is better. We're up a pawn, don't forget that. If they play bishop a3, you once again break it, and now you just over support the knight on a5 by pawn on knight on b4 by pawn on a5, and black looks really good. Another thing and suggestion could be an engine one. It's queen a5. Firuzia played it one game. He went for queen a5, and basically the point of queen a5 is to avoid any a takes b4 because rook is hanging on a1. And when they play bishop b2, to do that, you just play knight c6. So when they take, you take. Now you threaten the bishop. They got to defend it most likely with a queen, and you go with the knight on h6. It's an engine top choice. I don't think it's a human approach, but okay, you should be familiar with this one and know that here engine also likes black. And finally, if on a3 you don't want to take, but you want to just go with knight c6, that's what I played a couple of times in my games. A takes, bishop takes, c3, bishop goes back on e7. What's the problem by black here? Problem by black is the knight on g8, and not only bishop on c8. So let's solve both of these problems. You play bishop d7, and they go bishop d3. And now I want to show you three different plans. Predrag Nikolic, famous Bosnian GM, who was one of the best French players of all times, French defense players, he went with the idea f5. A very clever idea, where he's actually kind of provoking this guy. If you take, I'll take by knight, I'll play castle, play bishop d6, and all of a sudden my game is good, because eventually I want to break with e5 and have an open f-file. If you go with h3, and to go g4, I'll play h5, and you won't be able to do g4. Well, at the same time, now I have knight h6, knight f7. It supports g5. It gives you like pretty nice control on the king side, and basically prevents all the time all their ideas related with g4. And finally, there is a plan. If you don't want to play f5, which I'm fond of, you can also go a6, castles, and here you have two plans. Take a look at this one. What's the weakest piece in French? Light square bishop. Let's exchange it. So you just go with knight a7. And the idea is to exchange the light square bishops with the bishop b5. And once they play knight a3, c-file is yours. That's another good point by removing the knight and opening c-file. And if they play queen c2, boom, you once again take it. You're freeing the e7 square for the knight. But before that, let's first exchange the strong bishop for a weak bishop, and then I'll settle my knight on e7 and eventually make castle, where your bishop on a3 looks pretty powerful, but it basically does nothing that special. And another thing is, if bishop d2, I once again take it and play bishop b5, once again exchanging my weak or potentially weak bishop for your strong bishop. You can't avoid it because the rook is on f1, and I just want to play knight e7 followed by short castle. Don't forget, we're up a pawn. Finally, there is one more plan. If you play rook c8, they go like this, and you go knight h6. This is usually a problem. So your problem is what to do with the dark square knight. It doesn't go on f5 where most of you think it should be going, but you want to go with f6 and you want to hide it on f7 where it's going to be hidden, it's going to be good, but at the same time it's going to pressure the peak of the pawn chain. I'm talking about the e5 pawn. We've seen all these different kinds of plans and ideas, so it's time to show you two knights defense. So I believe you're satisfied. I give you like 5 or 6 different plans and alternatives against the wing gambit. Try out everything and see what you like the most. In many of these positions, I'm going to give you like 2 or 3 alternatives. Like in advanced French, you'll see I'm going to give you these alternatives. So knight c3. When they play knight c3, you just need to go with knight f6. And when they go with knight f6, they just go with e5. You go knight f to d7, and I have to stop here because it's strictly one of those French type of positions that we gotta be familiar with. And at this moment, our opponent, by committing himself with e5, he also committed himself for playing with the pawn chain and with the pawns like this in the center. So when they play d4 to defend the pawns in the center, what's the golden rule of the French positions? Always fight against the pawn chain by breaking it with c5, followed by knight c6, and followed by queen b6. And as soon as you get a chance to take on d4, in which case they can take, for example, by pawn on d4, you always should take advantage of that and break their pawn chain, weakening the pawn on e5 indirectly. Also, there is another way of attacking the pawn chain. It goes with f6, where you just want to force them to take. You recapture by knight or queen, in some variations even by pawn, and you want to fight for the center, mainly with e5 move afterwards. Here you play c5, they take, you go knight c6. What I like about knight c6, you rather want to take pawn on e5 than pawn on c5. Both of these pawns are about to fall, but white, when he chooses which one to give, he's never going to give up e5 pawn. He's always going to give up c5 pawn. So after bishop e4, he needs to keep an eye on the strong pawn, and you just take by bishop on c5. They develop bishop on d3, and you have to go with f6. I insist on this move because we managed to break the pawn chain with c5, and that's one way of breaking these pawns. They have this pretty annoying pawn on e5, and now we're just breaking it with, once again, a very important f6 move. I have to stop here and to tell you that most of guys can simply, they can forget or make no difference between playing f6 and doing castle and playing f6 here. Please guys, don't forget about this one. If you do castle here, you should get ready to go home. Great gift, buddy. Great gift, buddy. Bishop h7, and when you take, knight g5, and when your king goes here, queen h5, go home, sweetheart. Your king is gonna get mated. Or if the king goes to g6, they just go with some queen to d3 check. You go f5 because on this one it's mate, and if you go on f5, they just can go with the queen on g3, and all of a sudden knight e6 is threatened, queen is under the attack, king is not in safety, and this is completely lost position for you. So I'm insisting once again, when you play against the two knights opening, play like c5, knight c6, and here capture by the bishop on c5. When they play bishop d3, you just have to go with f6. So what's the point about this f6 idea at this point? When you play f6 at this point, you just have to understand that position is like very, very difficult for these guys, and you just have to know that all of a sudden they just have to deal with pawn on e5. I mean, they can't keep blockade on e5, and they just have to exchange it. So when they take it, we have two ways of taking. I remember when I was younger, I played against so many games on World Chess Network against Gadir Gusenov. He's one of the top Azeri GMs, and at that time he was young, and I used to take by queen. That's an approach that Grandmaster Draško, Montenegro GM, used to give here for black players, and it's full of tricks. If bishop takes g5, bishop attacks the queen, queen f7, and now I remember Guseina went in one of those games bishop h4, until I realized that I had to play knight d on e5, exchanging the knight, and bishop knight e5, knight e5, and equalizing the game this way, and that's what I did afterwards and equalized the game, and I had no problems. I fell for in one of these games for castles, and the guy killed me with bishop h7 because you can't play king h7 because of knight g5 and go home. But okay, those were bullet games, so I blundered, and then I realized, I'm not supposed to play this. First I played h6, then I saw that I had some problems with the light squares and with the pawn structure like this, but at least I wanted to make castle, till I realized that I should be going with this one. Another plan is when you play, and when they go with the bishop g3, you just go castles, they just go castles, and in a game like this, I played a6, Guseina went for queen e2, and at that time I went with some knight d4, bishop d4, rook a to e1, just like you see. He's not allowing me to play e5, d5 is gonna hang by this knight. He's not allowing me to play knight e5 or bishop e5. Both of these moves are kind of impossible because they just keep controlling e5. I went for knight c5. Guseina played bishop d6 in one of those games. I came up with this novelty. He told me, you're the only one who came up with this novelty, but I still had problems in these positions because somehow as long as I have problems with the light square bishop and I cannot move these pawns, he's gonna block me on e5 and he's gonna outplay me with the knight against the bishop. So that's why nowadays when I teach someone how to play against the two knights opening, I teach my students to go with knight f6. It's a typical French approach, and here they have two type of reactions. Most of these guys who play two knights against the French on regular basis, they go with castle. But if they go with queen e2 and long castle, then you just go with a very simple plan. You just go short castle, they go long castle, and the very important part of your plan is to go with some a6. a6 doesn't only stop knight b5, but it gives you more important b5 idea with b4 launching the queenside action. When they play knight e5, golden rule of these positions is play bishop d7, give up the weak bishop for the knight. That is a good blocking piece. And when they play rook h to e1, you just take, they just take, and then you launch the queenside action with this. They launch the kingside action with g4, and it's a constant fight because they want to play g5, and now you just go with some bishop e8, so you can't play g5 because of bishop h5. And once again, it's a roughly equal game because we have an open f file, we have a pressure by these pieces, and position looks, I'd say, with mutual chances, but objectively speaking, white is a little bit better in this type of games. Although, if you're wondering what are we supposed to do and do we have anything else in this position, yes, we do have early bishop d7. So when they play knight e5, you can just go with something like knight e5, and when they play bishop e5, for example, I like positions with early b5 where I sack the pawn and where I'm always open for initiative on the queen side, because by sacking pawn I actually getting in the boss and the driver's seat, and I'm the one who's leading up the game in this type of games. And finally, for those who after knight f6 play short castle, you just have to notice that we want to play knight h5 and knight f4 in some moments, knight g4 in some moments, and also we would like to go with bishop d7, completing our development. Those are some general ideas. They just go with knight e5. Complete strategy by white should be based on not letting us to go with e5 or d4, but mainly e5, because if we manage to go with e5, all of a sudden they have terrible problems with our center, with the f file. They have problems with f2 square. They have problems with the bishop on c5. On any knight e5, you have to remember golden rule. Don't take on e5, because as long as they have piece on e5 and they block these two pawns, at some point of my chess development and having so many games in practice against the French, I realized that I hate French when I end up being blocked on e6 and d5 by one of either knight on e5 or bishop on e5. Because the more you exchange, the weaker these pawns on e6 and d5 are. And as a French player, I started to hate to play French, playing and fighting against these bishops like this, and with these pawns like this. So that's why I realized that we should never take, but always play bishop d7. It's a traditional idea. If they fall for the trick and take, you take by queen and play e5 followed by rook a d8 or rook a to e8. And you have fantastic position. Center is yours. But if they go queen e2 and they keep controlling e5 square, you gotta go queen e7, they go rook a to e1, and you go rook a to e8. The complete fight is who is going to release tension in the center first, white or black. Who does that? He loses the advantage. I'll show you king h1. Idea is bishop g3 and f4 in order to maintain control of the center and e5 square. Once they do it, you just go a6. An idea of a6 is not only to play b5, it's also to avoid some bishop b5 positional ideas by bishop c6 and knight b5 ideas controlling the dark squares. When they play bishop g3, you just go with g6. That's a fantastic move because all of a sudden your knight wants to go on h5 to harass the dark square bishop. By removing the dark square bishop, you get like better control and chance of getting rid of the knight on e5. So when they play f4, you play knight h5. They go queen g4, you take. They take, and finally, when you take advantage of these situations and when you realize that you can take and they cannot take by piece, and here taking by piece would be pretty bad because of bishop d6 or bishop d4, they just realized that's the case, and they just, this guy in correspondence game, take by pawn, this one, and after rook f8 with the bishop pair, without any more weak pawn structure, but now good pawn structure. So as long as your opponent is forced to take by pawn, these pawns are not weak anymore. I believe I showed you what to do against these systems. And finally, before we go on the second line, I just want to show you what happens in the King's Indian attack. So what happens after d3? On d3, I have to teach you how to play against the typical King's Indian attack, where I'm going to show you like a couple of interesting plans that I used in my career against these lines. And I also have to show you how to play against Moldavian system. So how does it go and what's going to happen there? I've been talking so much, so I just need to take some water as well. After they go with d3, you just need to play d5. And when you play d5, they have typical move knight d2 that happens in probably 80% of the games in this opening. And lately, there is a Moldavian system by white with queen e2 that became very popular. A good friend of mine, GM who passed away, Grandmaster Dima Svetushkin, used to be a good representative of this variation with white, Bologan as well. So all these top GMs from Moldova. After queen e2, you just go with knight f6. The point of queen e2 is once again they're threatening to take on d5, and if you're forced to take by queen, they will play knight c3 with tempo and you'll be in problem. Also, in all these variations where you just play d takes, they would just play like this, and they wouldn't have to exchange the queens, and they would have some pretty much hidden ideas and positions that remind me of ready defense and ready positions, and white seems to perform well and do well in those games. So here I suggest you to play knight f6, knight f3, And amongst zillions of opportunities and moves that you can go here, such as b6, knight c6, b5, that Korchnoi played, I very much like to go with bishop e7. And I would say, but why? What's so special? Specialty is that when you play g3, c5, bishop g2, knight c6, castles, castles, e5, knight d7, all these guys who play this Moldavian system, they won't go with the typical h4, knight b2, rook e1, because queen on e2 doesn't help them to simply fulfill that plan, and it's a typical waste of time. So those who play this Moldova system with queen e2, they just need to go with c4. And here I have a specialty. When I played the GM tournament in my city for the 75 years of my chess club, I was supposed to play against Grandmaster Svetushkin. We drew that game, but in a little bit different fashion. I was preparing something for him because I found this variation very difficult. And then I found the following fantastic Banco-like type of move. So it's b5. It's a fantastic, I even believe it's the complete refutation of the complete system. And I remember Rapport played it, Grandmaster Perunovic played it, not me, and black all of a sudden looks great. So when they go with b5, they have two kinds of reactions. C takes d5, in which case you recapture by e pawn. So when they play knight c3, threatening both d5 and b5, you never give up the central d5 pawn, but you give up the b5. When they take it, you kick it away, and after knight c3, play bishop g4. All of a sudden, you threaten knight d4. You want to go after the knight on f3 and queen on e2, and they just have lots of problems. Also queen d7, placing the rook on the open file, a rook on c8. Black has more than good compensation, and don't forget, they can never kick it away because knight d4, and wherever they put the queen, you just take and grab the pawn on h3. That's a very important thing. Or in this position, okay, I played very stupid queen e3 because queen e3 would be faced with bishop f3 and knight c2. But here they just have to go with queen d1, and then you just take like this and play bishop h3, and black should look great. There's another thing. If they play knight b5, your knight goes on a5 and supports the typical Banco idea with a6. When they take bishop a6, this is a very a lovely position. You just want to go knight c6, knight e4. You just want to go with queen b8 and rook c8. It is especially efficient if, for example, bishop f4, you go knight c6, h4, you go knight e4. If they take, you will recapture by pawn. They move the knight, for example, here to go knight e2 and so on. Your queen goes on b8 or b6, doesn't matter, and then your rook goes on c8. An ideal compensation for you, but I believe it's better to place your queen on b6 since they have that bishop on f4 not to be under the x-rays. So your next move would be a rook ac8, fc8, or rook fb8. Black has a full compensation. Also knight c5 going with this bishop and the knight against the pawn on d3. And if rook to d1, knight c6, we just want to go with the knight e4, attacking the queen and the knight, knight e4, kicking the knight away with tempo, and queen b8 followed by rook c8. Take a look at this one. Complete domination of the black pieces, and all of a sudden they have lots of problems on these diagonals and these files. Whole things considered, this is, I'm free to say, refutation of Moldavian system. And finally, let me just show you a couple of interesting plans against the King's Indian attack. King's Indian attack was popular ever since Fischer started to play a little bit serious. He made so many nice and short wins in miniatures with the white pieces, so you definitely have to know how to play against this system. I'm going to teach you Moldavian system with the black pieces that turns out to be perfect for black in practice, but I'm also going to teach you how to play in the main line. In the main line, you play knight f6, knight f3, c5, knight c6, bishop g2, bishop b7, rook e1, b5. So just like you see, well, your opponent tends to close the center and goes with a typical knight f1, h4, knight h2, knight g4, bishop f4, h5, h6 plan. You just go with a pawn push on the queen side. When you play a5, they go h4, you go b4, and they go bishop f4. Once you play a4, now white has to decide whether he's going to play a3, which is the main approach when you push and when you create this position. And those who play a3, I'll show you what to do. But let's see those who allow you to play a3. That happened to me a couple of times. Then you play a3 yourself. And now you're probably wondering what should be your plan, because we both know that they want to play knight g5 and queen h5, one plan. That they want to go with knight g4, second plan. That they want to go with h5 and h6, whether they do it in first or second plan, it's part of the main idea for white. And once they play this knight g4, h5, h6, they just want to exchange the dark square bishops and to attack on the king side. Because of this, we need to be spot on and to know our plan. Our plan goes with knight a7. Remember, you just want to bring your knight to c3, and for the rest of the game, to tie his rook up for the defense of the a2 pawn, while our knight is going to stand pretty good in the center, controlling and attacking and pressuring this a2 pawn. They should never give it up, because we're going to give it, and we're going to promote the pawn. So they go knight g4 and they go knight g5. If they go knight g4, you go knight b5. They go queen d2, you go knight c3. They go h5, you play bishop b7. And this is how I probably had hundreds of blitz games. They think when they exchange the dark square bishop, and it's one of the most important defensive pieces in our game, that they just did like 90% of the job. But the point is, we go d4. What's the hidden point by this one? After bishop e7, queen e7, and queen f4, you gladly give up this bishop. Don't give them knight g5, knight e4 ideas or whatsoever, and you play rook a7. Point of rook a7, they won't be able to play bishop c6 and get rid of this one. Simply, it doesn't work for them. That's one thing. But another thing, I also like to play this move and not giving my opponents to play any bishop c6, threatening bishop d7 and knight f6. Well, at the same time, I don't know if I should ever push f6 or not, because I might end up with a weak pawn on e6. I played so many games like this, and let's be honest, they don't have a way to break through, but we also don't have a way. So more or less, this is around equal position. Then you have guys who will apply that plan with the knight g5 followed by queen h5. Ever since Fischer, that game was plan was very popular and very difficult. If queen comes on h5, we're gonna get mated. The unique type of defense and refutation here is queen e8. It's aimed against queen h5, because once you play queen h5, they take, and once they take and attempt to jump with the knight g5 and knight f6, you play f5. A beautiful concept behind the queen on e8. Now, you cannot take any en passant e takes or g takes, since queen is hanging. If you exchange the queens, I'm happy. Then I have an easy knight b5, knight c3, and then there is only one side who can fight for a win here. That's black. While at the same time, white has absolutely nothing. If they try to keep the queens on the board, knight c6, this knight possibly may go to d4, so they gotta stop it. And now you just go knight e7. Bishop wants to go on a6, maybe to break with c4. This knight is gonna go on g6, and they don't have anything on the king side. And finally, what happens by if they play a3? I found the game of Wesley Saw. You just capture. You just play rook b8, so b file is yours. And not only that, you also want to bring your rook back to the second rank and pressuring the c2 and a3 pawns. So if they play knight 1 to h2, you go bishop a6, you go rook b4, you just jump on d4. When they play like this, you go this way, queen goes on b6, and all of a sudden, just like you see, your opponent has problems with the pawns on a3, with our b file. They don't have the don't seem to have any kind of attack on the king side, and we're just doing fine. Important thing is don't let them exchange the dark square bishops. Don't ever take anything there. Play bishop c5, they go queen f4, play rook b8. When they take, and remember a golden rule of these positions, defensive approach, that the bishop on f8 just defends everything. Those, for example, who realize that you can mate them, for example, they go queen f4, you take the pawn, they go here, you take another pawn, and they go for the last desperate attempt. If you don't want to risk anything, just play bishop c5 and finish them all. Play bishop e7, but you also can take on g7 and take the pawn, and they don't have a key pawn on h6, and they don't have mate, and you're already 2 pawns up, and you're about to win the game. And finally, rook b8, 93, 94. We're always happy to exchange like this, where I especially like one idea. They would like to go with h5 and h6, breaking on the king side. You now can go with the rook b5. An idea of rook b5 is to get the control of the f file, of the b file. When I put my queen on b6, play bishop a6, and put rook on c8, I'm gonna have like full control. So I don't want to place my queen on b6, because at some point they can harass my queen with rook b1 or so, but I want to play rook b5 followed by queen b6, h5 bishop a6, h6 g6, and take a look at this one. They can never play any queen d2, which looks so logical because you win the bishop with g5. So that's another tricky thing. You don't give them bishop g5, and on the contrary, and on top of all that, you even trap the piece this way. All things considered, these are the plans in a classic approach. Let me just teach you the Moldavian system. Yeah, before that, after knight g3, c5, I want to show you one system that I used in few games. After rook e1, I didn't play b5 in 2 games. I played against Grandmaster Vasile Sandulak from Moldova. It looks like Moldavian players like to play these systems with white and black. And I played king h8. I remember I was very young, and I was shown this variation by Grandmaster Rajkovic, famous Serbian GM and many times Serbian Yugoslavian champion at that time. Idea of king h8 is on e5 to play knight g8. A very interesting system. So don't forget about this one. I like to use it for many years, and then at some point you just want to play f6, and once they take, you recapture by g-pawn, and then you just want to go with e5. Well, this knight on g8 prevents from any bishop h6 and stuff like that. I'm just giving you an interesting plan and idea to maybe go in one of your games. If I could use it in 2 games and draw against GM and another 1-1, then you can also use it. I'm talking about the tournament games. Finally, Moldavian system. You just go c5. If they go knight g on f3, you go knight c6, they go g3, and you have time for bishop d6. But if they go with g3, it's very interesting that you shouldn't go knight c6, because when they play bishop g2, now you don't have time for bishop d6, since they're going to take on d5. So you gotta first play bishop d6 if you want to play the Moldavian system. So when they attack on d5, you can play knight e7 just in time. So when they play knight f3, you play knight c6, castles, castles, and the whole concept and point of Moldavian system with the black is not to push them to do what they all want to do, it's e5. So if they go with rook e1, you go queen c7 and say, I'm not gonna let it happen. He says, yes, you will. You say, no, I'm not. And you play f6. He goes c3, you go bishop d7. He goes a3, you go d4. He goes knight c4, you say, I don't care anymore about this bishop, because that bishop didn't have any value anymore. And if they ever c takes, and go with b4, you always go b5, fighting against structure like this. They take, you take, and now you can easily choose the moment when are you going to break on the queen side and play a5. Those are important things, and that's what you need to do in these positions if you want to equalize, not even equalize, even get a slight advantage. I just want to tell you one more thing. After bishop d6, bishop g2, knight e7, there are a second type of players who realize that you go for a Moldavian system and that you will, at all costs, prevent e5. And they just say, okay, I won't play rook e1. I know that you will stop that with queen c7 and f6. I'll go with the knight h4 and play f4 with the idea f5. Then you instantly play on the wing, they play in the center, and you instantly now react in the center. Why? So any e5 you can react with the bishop c5, king h1, you just go with c takes, and then you just go with b4, your queen goes on b6, pawn on a5, bishop on a6, and all of a sudden they have lots of problems with a pawn on d3 and on diagonal like this. Guys, I believe in the past hour, and I guess even a little bit more than that, I just explained you all the sidelines against the French, and we'll definitely have to divide this video in 2 chapters. The first one, where I just covered all these sidelines except the main lines. So in the next chapter, I'm going to explain you how to play against the 4 main moves against the French defense. So I'm going to explain you how to play against exchange variation e takes d5. I'm going to give you plans against Tarrasch defense. I'm going to give you ideas and plans against advanced French, and of course knight c3. Hopefully you're going to subscribe and stay on the channel, and hopefully you're going to like the analysis and be able to apply these ideas in your games. Thanks for watching, and keep patiently waiting for the second chapter and how to actually solve all these main lines with the black pieces. Thanks, and see you soon.